Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 8th instalment in my long-form Gran Turismo Sport review, in particular currently for the closed beta, but of course the implications from the beta do carry over to the fully released game whenever that is due to come out. Sometime this year, hopefully. Beyond that, we can't really say for sure. Now, this particular instalment follows on quite naturally from the new cars episode, because this is new circuits or new tracks. And new tracks doesn't necessarily just fall under completely new circuits. That could be reimaginings of existing tracks, or maybe just updates of existing tracks as well. Now, Gran Turismo Sport is due to have a number of racetracks which we haven't currently seen. We've only seen around 9 of the specific locations so far, and of those 9, only 5 of them, at least for me personally, have been available on the beta. Now, the tracks which have been confirmed but which are not on the beta are Tokyo Expressway, which I saw some racing for at the release event in London, but I didn't actually drive on that track myself. That's a city circuit, and is kind of a spiritual successor, if you will, to Tokyo Route 246, that kind of thing. Whether or not we'll have both remains to be seen, but it's that kind of track. We also have a track which, for the moment at least, is simply called Dirt Track, which covers areas between the Rocky Mountains and the Mexico border. That should be interesting to rally on, of course. We've also got Fisherman's Ranch, which is another rally circuit, and also the Sardinia Windmills, which again is another rally circuit. So it's good to see that so far we have at least 3 rally tracks confirmed, which may not sound great, but in comparison to the 9 tracks which we currently have in total, that's a pretty good ratio of rally tracks to normal road circuits. Because typically, of course, on Gran Turismo you have far more road tracks than rally tracks, and on Gran Turismo 6, for instance, rallying was almost totally forgotten. There was no rally license, there were hardly any rally events. In career mode, there are no rally events at all, and the only rallying that you can really do is either online or really on your own. I don't recall even seeing any in seasonal events. There may have been some while back, but if there was, I certainly can't remember that. So the fact that we do have about a third of the currently confirmed tracks based in gravel circuits, that's good. That's a good sign. And rallying has been pushed forward for GT Sport more so than it was definitely for GT6, and more so than I can remember hearing from other Gran Turismo games previously. Rallying has kind of been incidental to the road racing, whereas now it looks like they're pushing it more to the forefront, which is great. Now, we currently don't have access to the rally tracks, or at least I haven't seen any in the online servers in the beta, so I can't report as to how good those rally tracks are. You can see some footage on the game, it comes up like a screensaver in the background, but that's the only access we currently have to that. The tracks look interesting enough, but we'll have to wait and see. The tracks appear, at least to some degree, to be kind of reminiscent of rally tracks which we've already seen in Gran Turismo's past, but it's looking good. As far as road tracks, we have some, such as the Tokyo Expressway, that have been confirmed but not driven on in the beta, and then there are others, both real-world tracks and fictional ones, which we have had access to. Now, the first one of these new tracks is the Northern Isle Speedway. This is an oval circuit, it's only just over half a mile long, and a lap only takes around 14 to 15 seconds, so it's a tiny circuit, but although it's very short, the track is one of the widest in the game. You can easily pilot 3 cars abreast, and it could make for some pretty cool, intense racing. It's certainly a lot more intense than something like Special Stage Route X, where there's a huge amount of space between the cars, basically until you get to the final corner. A top speed track, this one certainly isn't, but it could still put a very interesting twist on oval racing. Next up we have a real circuit, Brands Hatch, and this is one of those tracks which hasn't really changed that much compared to what we currently have on Gran Turismo 6. We have a couple of different variations on GT6 of this circuit, and again we have a couple of variations of the track on the beta. It's a track which I personally don't love. I don't dislike it, but it's not one of my preferred tracks. It's a little bit too short for my liking, but overall the track looks good. It doesn't look radically different though to what we already have. Speaking of updates on existing tracks though, we have one of the most iconic racing circuits in the world, if not the most iconic, the Nürburgring Ring. And feel free to comment on my pronunciation of that down in the comments, because I frankly couldn't care less. But that track has been updated visually. It's sunnier and brighter than it currently is. Personally, I think the track looks great. And it's the Nürburgring, so of course it's going to look the way it looks because it's a real track. Overall, it's definitely a little bit more different compared to what we currently have than Brands Hatch is, but at the same time it's very familiar. That's a good thing, and the track feels, at least for the moment, a little bit happier in terms of the weather, if that makes sense. A bit brighter, a bit sunnier, and that does help to lighten the mood, considering that in the real world the Nürburgring often has a lot of rain. Then moving on to another track which we already do have, and again one of the brightest tracks, but this track on GT6 is one which you have to be careful with what time of day you run on. Any time between say 9 o'clock and early evening on this track, and it is so bright that it kind of looks weird. And that's Willow Springs. Of course it is a real world track, and it's one which is all about high speed flow. There are really no technical corners on the track at all. It's all very flowing from corner to corner, and it definitely favours certain cars over others, especially smaller, more compact vehicles which can maintain high speed through a corner without having to lift off the throttle or have braking mid-corner, that kind of stuff. Visually though, there have been some changes made to Willow Springs. There are hot air balloons in the air, which is incidental but interesting enough, and more importantly the lighting is a lot better on the track, and the textures of the sand are a lot better as well. The colour grading as well, for me personally at least, looks a lot better. As I mentioned before, the lighting on that track can kind of look a bit iffy when you choose too bright a time of day, whereas now it looks better, at least at the time of day that we're racing on. We'll have to see when you change the time of day how it fares, but you know, I can only comment on what I've got to work with. And finally, possibly my favourite new track of the ones which we can currently use is the Dragon Trail International Seaside Raceway. This is a semi-technical circuit. I would say in terms of enjoyability it's similar to Ascari. It's not quite as long as that track in terms of time, but it's a lot of fun. It allows you to have high-speed sections and tighter corners, which doesn't necessarily overly favour one type of car. It allows for the use of multiple types of race car even within certain categories. For instance, the Alfa Romeo 4C race car, which is more about small, compact, lightweight handling, but at the same time it does also favour cars with more top-end power, something like a Corvette or a Ferrari 458. So you get a nice mix of both, and having driven this track with a number of different vehicles in a number of different categories, it is very fun, or at least has been for me so far. And that brings us finally to the last of the newer tracks that I've had the opportunity to race on, Blue Moon Bay, which is kind of another oval track, though it's not actually oval shaped. And it's a much higher speed track than the Northern Isle Speedway. Slightly bigger laps, but still not huge, and although it is a high speed track, you're looking in most of the cars that I've driven on it with, such as the SLS, which you can see in the video, at speeds of around 170, 180, that kind of speed, so it's not crazy fast, at least not with the current cars, but still, it certainly has the potential to be a very high speed competitive track, especially given that the corners can be tricky. You do have to slow right down for some of them. It's not the kind of oval track where you can just go flat out all the way round. But that's it overall for my current thoughts on the newer circuits which we have access to, and some of the ones which have been confirmed but which we haven't really had access to for the most part yet, such as Tokyo Expressway and the rally tracks. But overall, I like the way the tracks are looking, and of course, race tracks are a very important part of the game. Not just obvious stuff like the way they look, but the amount of tracks is a very important thing. Personally, I find that the amount of race tracks on a game is almost more important than the amount of cars, because there are some games which have fantastic car lineups like Drive Club or Project Gotham, which really do have incredible cars. And in the case of those two games, they have certain cars which are almost exclusive to those games. Amazing cars, but they don't really have that strong selection of tracks. You initially might think that they do when you first play the game, but they get repetitive quite quickly. So hopefully that won't happen with Gran Turismo Sport, and there are plenty of tracks which haven't been released yet, both new and made up for the game, so we'll have to see how they turn out. But for the moment it's looking good as far as new tracks and updated existing tracks. So if you'd like to check out more Gran Turismo Sport info such as graphics, physics, car sounds, cars in general, you can of course check out other parts covering those things in the playlist at the end of this video, and of course you could sub down below to see new videos for GT Sport as soon as they're released. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.